Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Do you struggle with being negative? Most people struggle with being negative. Being positive takes action. Using simple positive actions will allow you to win each day. Being negative is a discharge in 3 key areas. Number 1, your mindset to achieve your goals. Number 2, your influence on self and others. And number 3, your ability to learn and grow. Implementing simple positive actions into your life will allow you to win each day. Being positive takes action, so let's work to be positive. To receive a weekly video email from me on one simple positive action, subscribe to the series by going to chargepodcast.com to get the link to register today. Life is short, so why live your life by default when you can live your life by design? Make it a great day. Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week. Can you believe it is coming up the end of the third quarter? I'm telling you, we've talked about it a lot of times, but that's why you got to create habits around real goals every day, because life moves at a rapid pace. And as entrepreneurs and business owners, you know that. So 2022, we're going to really be putting in the books the first 9 months of the year. I want you to think about, what do you have to do the rest of this year to make it successful for you? And today's guest is going to help make you think. So that's why I'm setting that up like that, because he's going to make us think about the words and what we think about. How do we back that up with science? So today I've got with us Rob, but Rob, would you share with the Charge Podcast listeners, what problem will you solve for them today?
I'm going to solve how to influence decisions by using brain science to change how you write.
Ooh, I like this. This is going to be fun. So we're going to be backing up by science. I'm going to introduce you to Rob Ashton. He's an entrepreneur and former scientist who has had a lifelong fascination with how the things we read and write influence what we think and do. He's been researching the science behind the process of reading and writing for more than 6 years. His research runs the gamut of cognitive and social neuroscience, cognitive and social psychology, and behavioral and neuroeconomics. So, Rob, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm interested in this topic, and I think it's one we have to think about, because we do need to know, how is science backed up with our writing and really with our communication? So let's just start there. What are some of the consequences of not taking the words we write more seriously?
Well, it's very easy not to take them seriously because it's something we take for granted, and maybe we can dig into that. But we write all the time. We've become a writing species, if you like. We don't realize it, but we're doing it all the time. You know, we tend to write almost instead of speaking much of the time, which means that if you don't pay attention to that and understand how the brain processes writing, because it's very different from how it processes speech, then you find that all aspects of, many aspects of your life can go awry. You don't get the decisions you want, you don't get the reaction you want, and you generally you open yourself up to a whole lot of pain. But on the flip side, you really are holding yourself back. You're never going to reach your potential if you don't understand the fundamentals of how reading and writing work.
Yeah, and they're such a piece. I just know with children, I've done some research, and I'm sure with your science, you've seen that too, how it makes a difference in children. If you start them young reading, their comprehension level and what it's done. I've seen that. I give my wife the credit that when they were little, we read to them, but as soon as they could start reading, we had them reading, and it's really made a difference. And plus the love of reading, and then to be able to write that. We've got a son right now that's getting journalism, and he loves to write, but that becomes a love for it that he creates. Why do you think the messages we write so often backfire?
Lots of reasons, but it all comes down to evolution. We didn't evolve to read and write. So, the humans have been on this earth for around 6 million years, and we've been writing for no longer than 5,000. Now it takes, for the brain to undergo substantial change, evolutionary change, takes around 1 million years. And so you can see that although 5,000 years might sound like a long time, it's just a heartbeat in evolutionary terms. So what we're doing is we're using a brain that we evolved for speaking and listening for reading and writing. It's when we're reading, our brain is often operating at the limits of its capacity. And you mentioned there reading as a child. We learn to speak, we learn to understand spoken language just by osmosis, just by being in an environment of people speaking to us. That's how we acquire our native language. That's even how we acquire some of the fundamentals of grammar. Kids understand a lot more about grammar than we think they do. They know that usually you put a D on the end of a verb to forward in the past tense, and you can see that they make mistakes. Instead of saying saw, they might say seed. You can see from those mistakes they've made, or thinked instead of thought. So we pick up those things by osmosis naturally, but it's not the case for reading and writing. Reading and writing are entirely unnatural. Okay, there's nothing more unnatural for the human brain than reading and writing. And in order to learn to read and write, we have to rewire the brain. That's why it takes so long, and it has to be done deliberately, but it remains quite an energy intensive or cognitively hungry activity. When we're reading and writing, we're using a lot more energy than we think we are. If you think about it, it's a miracle of adaptation. You see dots and squiggles on a screen and you hear a voice in your head. Once you stop and think about that, that is pretty amazing, but it takes a lot of brain power. And so when we're doing that, we by taking this for granted, what we do is we almost credit the reader with a lot more brain power than they have. We credit them with superhuman powers, and it means that if they are really tired by what they're reading, or it's very easy. We have no idea where people are going to be reading stuff when we send a message to them. For example, they could be upset about something, and usually when we're reading, we have far less reserves for emotional control, which is why you see people losing their temper more frequently, say on social media or in email. So it's that it's a big topic. The first thing really to remember is that we didn't evolve to read and write, and reading is a lot harder than we think it is.
Yeah. Well, I love what you say there, because it's so true, is about how you're using more energy up. And when you're using the brain power and you're trying to read or write, you're using more of that. And that's where most people on this podcast, I always ask guests, and you're going to get it at the end, charges create habits around real goals every day. What's habit? And one of the biggest ones that probably 70% of the time I get is they have some sort of morning routine. And most people know some of the most important things they want to do. If they want to read, they want to have spiritual time, meditation, what that is, you can slow that down some and you've got that, but you have more energy to do it. I know when I'm creating, I've been fortunate to write 4 books. And with that, and people are always so surprised when you say you've written a book, but the thing is it's about writing daily. And, that's what I found out. If you break it down into smaller chunks, it makes it a lot more practical. So part of my question here is, you call writing kind of the invisible medium. Why do you think that is?
It's something we don't realize we're doing. So as I mentioned at the top of the program, it's something we're doing all the time. And we don't, if I say writing to people, if I say the science of writing, people kind of look at me a bit strangely and kind of go, what, you mean like writing a book? And you mentioned that, or handwriting, or, creative writing, writing a novel. And I said, well, yeah, all of that, but really, I mean the thing you do all day. I mean the emails, the text messages, the instant messages, live chat. Live chat on, for getting in touch with a customer help desk. That's writing. It's called chat, but it's not. It's not chat. It's not speaking. It's writing, which is why it so often goes wrong. So it's the invisible medium because it's hidden in plain sight. It's something we're doing all day. It's all writing. It's just, if my phone rings, I assume something's wrong. It must only be a matter of time before the phone companies forget to put a telephone function in our smartphones. We have to download an app afterwards. We don't even use it most of the time for speaking. It's all writing. So it's something we're doing all day, every day, and we just don't realize it.
So what would you say is our challenge then? Because we're doing that writing. But of course, one of the challenges is a lot of us are just doing it. We're not really, that's the problem. We allow that emotional side, like on a text, somebody can get a text and I can read into that the emotion, or that they're really mad, or they're happy, or, they're sad sometimes, or a lot of times what happens, I read the wrong message into it. But when we're writing it, we have to think about what we're writing, because otherwise it's just something that you do and you send back a quick message. And I don't know how many times you've done this, but of course I've got teenagers and young adults, and what they're thinking is dad has to ask the stupid question. What did you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's and you mentioned there replying to a message. That's where we can often really trip ourselves up, when we're reacting to something. So the best thing you can do is stop and not reply at all if you find yourself under the influence of emotion. Now that takes an enormous effort, an enormous will of almost superhuman mindfulness. Once you're locked into that screen, you are thinking on your screen. This is what we do. We think in that rectangle, of our phone or our laptop, and we think of them as an extension of our brains. So it's a habit that you really do need to cultivate. To just say, right, am I reacting? Don't trust what you think when you first read something. And again, this takes an awful lot of practice. But it's not just the fact that you don't know what was behind the message. You don't know what that person was thinking. It's affected by what you're thinking too. So there's something called the affect heuristic, which is a cognitive bias we all have, where if something upsets us or even makes us happy, whatever is affecting whatever emotion we're experiencing, we will look to our environment for things that confirm that we're right to be experiencing that. So a good example, and slightly embarrassing one for me, and how I reacted was here in my office a couple of years ago, I was searching for something in the closet under the eaves, and I stood up and I banged my head on what is actually a reinforced steel joist, and I felt it was bad. In fact, even as I describe it, I can feel a shiver going down my neck. It affected me so much. I was nauseous. And I rubbed my head and probably swore a couple of times, and then I sat down at my laptop, and there was an email there from a conference organizer, and I just looked at it and thought, that's ridiculous, and I banged out this reply practically with my fists, not being outright rude, but certainly it was a curt message, curt reply, and I was really irritated by this. And then after about half an hour, when I'd finally calmed down and regained my composure, I read it again, and I was horrified because it was a perfectly reasonable request, and I'd misread it purely because of the emotion I was experiencing. The other thing that's really important is that we all listen to a backing track. We all have a backing track going on in our heads, and we assume that the person we're writing to has the same backing track. So there's an awful lot of assumed knowledge when we're writing that we shouldn't assume. So there's a great experiment that demonstrated this. It was going back it's about 30 years ago now. And what the experimenter did, a psychologist called Elizabeth Newton, is she asked people to tap out on a desk, just a rhythm to just tap out a tune. So not the music, but and a well-known tune. So it could be Happy Birthday or the Star Spangled Banner or something like that. And she asked people to estimate how likely it was, how many people out of 100 would be able to identify the tune just from that tapping on the desk. And the average was 50%.
Huh.
People thought that 50 out of 100 would be able to identify the tune. The actual figure was 2.5%.
Wow.
So we dramatically overestimate how much people can understand what we're thinking, because that's a proxy for. It's interesting because it was I think it was like 46% for women, but about 54 for men. So there was a significant difference. Men tended to overestimate the ability, this kind of telepathic ability with people we're communicating with, even more than women. But even for women, it was still very, very high, and a gross overestimate. This is what we do when we're writing. We think people can read our minds, and they can't. And that's one of the reasons we get into so much trouble when we're doing this. So really be mindful. Just try not to react. If you can, shut down the laptop. Close the lid. Go for a walk. And likewise with your phone. Don't stay stuck in an argument by text message. Just put it down.
Yeah, it's so true, because once we get emotionally involved, normally from an email, I've done the same thing. And the best thing you can do is say, okay, I'll come back to it later. I'll never forget, I used to get a report when we did our culture survey when I had my company and had over 100 and some employees. And every quarter we'd kind of do a culture survey of what they like. Well, my HR director got very smart. He started giving it to me on Fridays, because then he knew that I'd be gone the rest of the weekend. And then Mondays, I would come back a little more responsive of not being so emotional about it, because we did a lot of great things for our team. So, I thought, they ought to give us all these glowing remarks. The only problem was we were asking them for what areas are we weak. But, my emotional brain got involved. Once I read it, I would get emotional saying, gosh, we do this, we do that. Instead. But when I thought about it, then I'd come back the next week and say, okay, how can we solve these problems? These are issues for our team. And it allows you to really think through it. But emotionally, you can't. And we're seeing that all the time, because this instant communication is not always the best thing. It's like you said, sometimes you need to walk away from it. And, especially nowadays, because we're sending text and we're trying to communicate completely there. And that really kind of builds my next question that I wanted to ask you was, you say the key to getting decisions we want and really building those successful relationships is really not to write at all, but really to talk. And you've given a little bit of this, talk about it instead, or walk away from it. Why do you say that?
It's this idea of evolution again. When you speak, when you listen, you are communicating in the way that we evolved to communicate. Now, reading and writing, as I said, that it's a miracle of adaptation. We would not be able to do what we do. We would not have come as far as this without using writing. It is amazing, but it has its limits, and you shouldn't ask it to do too much heavy lifting. You shouldn't use writing to try to resolve an argument. You shouldn't use writing to deal with an emotive issue. Don't ask for a raise by email. Don't fire someone by, God forbid, text message. You are just asking for trouble, apart from being an inhumane thing to do. But you are asking for trouble. It's not going to end well. Writing is what psychologists call a low capacity channel. There's only so much that you can convey, and it's terrible for conveying subtlety, nuance, emotion, humor. The humor can fall flat, of course. It's you can insult somebody in a friendly way if you're speaking to them, but no, don't do that by email. That's not going to end well. So so often we can solve things just by taking this thing and we're tapping away. We're tapping away on our phone, and if we just moved it from in front of us up to our ears and spoke to someone, often we can resolve so many things. So I'll just give you an example of one study which I think was really quite revealing and intriguing. It was a study that looked at the release of the of oxytocin. That it's a hormone you sometimes called the the hug hormone or the love hormone. Yep. It's a bit more complicated than that, but it's something that's really central to how we interact with human beings. And what this study found was that in a stressful situation, so the subjects were put under a certain amount of stress, the oxytocin was released if they then spoke to somebody rather than if they got a message from them. Now it was, it's a limited study. It was actually children who were asked to solve a math problem in public, which does sound pretty stressful. But if their mothers texted them to reassure them, that the girls, because it was all girls, didn't release oxytocin. But if they spoke to them by phone, they did. And I think that's so intriguing and tantalizing, because it suggests that when we're speaking and listening, we're kind of well equipped, but when we're writing, we're not equipped with those essential tools. And you can almost feel this. I've been in an angry exchange on Slack with something that was really heading south with a colleague. It was getting quite tense. It wasn't outright angry, but you could see it was not going to end well. And this colleague just said it in Slack, just said, can we talk? Can I come into your office? And I said, yeah, of course, And he came in and we started talking, and immediately my shoulders dropped, his shoulders dropped. It was quite tense when he came in, but you could just see it, and I could feel it. I could feel something washing over me that just made the whole thing so much easier. So yeah, often the solution is not to write, but to talk instead.
Yeah, I think that's so valuable. I appreciate you sharing that, because, we cannot do it. And the sad part is we're doing now, we're virtual teams and everything else, but we've still got to have it. I mean, just like the communication here, we are on, you may be listening to this on your podcast app, but we're watching each other. We're communicating to each other. We're on Zoom so we can see each other. And I do that on purpose because it allows me to connect more with you. I've had some that I've done where they've not been where they've been able to put on their screen. And I'm telling you, looking at that blank screen, it's totally different. But that face-to-face communication allows that. And you may not always be in person, but what I found is I'm still able to connect to people when I'm here, and it changes the whole dialogue with the conversation. So appreciate you sharing that. Rob, you have a nice offer that you're willing to give, and I was looking at your website, a lot of great information on your website. Would you share with them where they can go and they actually can take your silent influence course?
Yeah, so of course, this is a free program I've created, and it is totally free. There's nothing for sale in there. It's a course that it's really summarizing the things I've been researching this for 6 years. And as you mentioned, I've been looking at all aspects of brain science. There's an awful lot of it out there. I gave myself 6 months initially, and here I am 6 years later still doing it. And I think I've got enough to keep me going until the end of my days. But what I've done is I've created this course, which is delivered by email with audio, so you can listen to each lesson as well as read it, whichever works best for you. It's initially 5 lessons, but I've actually already added a number onto the end of it. And as I discover new things, I'm adding more. So that's, as you say, it's called Silent Influence. And if you just go to my website, which is robashton.com, if you go to robashton.com/influence, that will take you straight to the sign up page. And also you can read a bit more about the course there before you sign up.
Excellent. And we'll come back to that, and we'll share that, and we'll have that in show notes for our chargers, because we know they're not waiting just to write it down. Instead, they'll have to go to the website to find it, and we'll have that on our chargepodcast.com, make it easy for them. Rob, before I go to the recharge round, my last question, and this maybe you want to give a long answer, but if it can be a shorter one, what made you so interested? You said 6 years, you kind of dove into this thought in 6 months. What made you, I know you're a scientist, so sometimes you like to be able to think through things deeper than some other people, but what was the initial Okay, I'm going to do some research on this.
Yeah, my science days. I was a scientist 30 years ago. It's a long time ago. But it never really left me. I moved into publishing, and I moved in from publishing. Eventually, set up my own business. So a training company specializing in written communication. And I did that for 24 years. It's still very much alive and kicking. I'm the chair now. I'm no longer CEO. I've recently stepped down from that. But I knew that what we were doing worked. What I was really doing, or what the company does, is it shares trade secrets from the publishing industry with people who aren't in publishing, just to help people write a lot more effectively. I knew it worked, but I also saw a lot of bad advice out there, and a lot of advice that just seemed to be based on pseudoscience. And also, I didn't know why our stuff worked, and I also didn't know if it could work better. So I thought, I've got nobody else is going to do this. I've got to dig into the science. And what I found was that there's so much out there, but it's all hidden in academia. It's hidden in academic journals. The academics know it; they take it for granted, but the people in the business world, in the wider working world, just don't. So much of this stuff, most of it, people have never heard of. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's become a lifelong obsession now. As I said, it will keep me going. And now I'm doing it full time. So it's like a return to my science roots, but overlaying that on this world of writing that I've inhabited, or had inhabited for 30 years.
Well, great. That's interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I just thought, I was curious. And when I get curious, I ask questions, because I think my audience members are doing the same thing. They're listening and say, well, why did he decide to get into that? So that's excellent. Well, I've got two questions for you in the recharge round before I let you go, and we have to wrap things up. My first one is, I told you that motto is charge, create habits around real goals every day, or mantra. What habit do you think's led to success in your life?
Well, it may not surprise you to hear me say reading. And you mentioned a reading habit.
Yeah.
I consume stuff, and I wish I could read more, but from a wide range. So read, read far. Select what you read from far and wide. Be careful what you read, but yeah, just absorb ideas and then make them your own. So and I think it's that habit. It's over time, just doing that. Reading every day. And reading lots of different sources. I just think that just feeds the brain. And I guess that, if we certainly in my case, I think it's just enabled me to generate ideas of my own. And you can't, the brain needs food to work on. You need to have raw material. You can't have ideas in a vacuum. So you need to feed it good information. So yeah, definitely reading.
Yeah, to become a thought leader, I was just talking to a gentleman today, and he's talked about all these different sources he has, and he's bringing together a concept. And I said, that's how you do it. I mean, we're able to grab them thoughts. Some of the things I talk about, it's from multiple sources, but you're bringing them together in your own intellectual side of it, and you're sharing that with the audience, just like what you're doing, Rob. I appreciate that. My last one is we all make failures or have a failure, and we'd love to have a do-over in life. Is there something in your life that you look back and you say, man, if I had to change that, I would do this over?
Yes, I would say. Am I allowed two quick ones? I would say don't pay too much attention to so much attention to what other people think of you.
Yes.
Definitely that can make you way too hesitant. But I think a big one is don't go chasing other people's success. We do a lot of that. There's a lot in the self-help world about modeling other people's success, and it's a thing called survivorship bias. You only see the people who did that and survived and succeeded. You don't see all the people who took the same approach and didn't survive. So you can kind of be looking at other people and thinking, right, I need to do that. I need to be like them. Don't be like them. Be like yourself. Don't worry about what they're doing. Sure. Learn from their information, but plow your own furrow, and make your own mark in the world. Don't worry about what other people are doing. Compare yourself to yourself.
Great advice. I appreciate you sharing that. Again, his website is robashton.com. We'll have that in show notes. And if you want to get the Silent Influence course, he's offering it to us free, allowing that. That's a 5-part free email course. And that again, Rob, how they get there is just robashton.com/influence.
Yeah, I think it's /, but yeah, I think
/influence. We'll have it in show notes. So the big thing is we know they won't be able to write it down here. So remember, go to chargepodcast.com. Great show notes for you, all those information there. Plus, Rob, you can connect with him. He's on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. So all those areas that you can connect with him, we will have those in the show notes too to make it easy. Rob, it's been a pleasure to get to know you, number one. We did not know each other before we jumped on the podcast. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your message to our Charge listeners. A lot of them are small business owners and entrepreneurs. And, reading and writing, we all learned a valuable lesson of how valuable it can be for our business today. So I can't thank you enough for joining us.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Gary. Great to get to know you. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Chargers, now my action I always give you after each podcast is an action item. Today's action item, I want you to read more, but I want you to really think about what you are writing. And we're all doing text messaging. We're all sending emails. But before you send it, I want you to read back over that message. And I want you to ask yourself, is that the message you really want to share with that person? Or are you emotionally involved and you need to change it? So that's my action for you. Think about it over the next week, because you're going to send lots of communication over the next week. You do this just for 7 days. It's going to change how you respond to it. Make it a great day, Chargers. We'll see you back here next week with another great guest. Thanks for joining us.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.